So, how many of you went to a Montessori school when you were a child? 3? Okay, so for the rest of us, we went to some version of a traditional, conventional school, right? Do you remember how you were treated as a child?
Yes.
Okay, what I want you to think about right now is, would you agree that Montessori treats children differently?
Yes.
We have a different attitude towards children. We have a different appreciation of children. Do you all agree?
Yes.
What I want you to spend about the next 5 minutes doing, not until I let you go though, you're going to be breaking up into groups of maybe 4 to 6 people. And I'd like one of you to be kind of a recorder to write down ideas. And I want you to try to make a list of the essential attitudes towards children that make Montessori different from everything else. Do you understand? Okay, no questions? You ready to get to work? Feel free to turn chairs around or whatever, just as long as you're willing to turn the chairs back around when we're done. And ready, go.
Turn around. Out of the way.
Oh. I apologize that I don't speak Russian, I don't speak Czech, I don't speak Norwegian, I almost said un peu Spanish. I always confuse the two. I don't speak Hindi, so I'm at a great disadvantage. But what I want you to do right now is, if you were the person in your group who was responsible for capturing some of the ideas, I'd like you to just think of one, raise your hand, and if you need help converting it to English, call on one of your colleagues, and Sue is going to record them over here. So what is one of the essential attitudes that define Montessori? Respect. Anybody else have that on their list? I feel like Aretha Franklin. I should be going, a little respect. All right, what else? Yes?
Joy for learning.
Joy in learning. Mm-hmm.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Yes? Inclusivity. Being inclusive. Mm-hmm.
Somebody mentioned, and I've never actually thought about it before, was a guilt-free environment.
Wow. A guilt-free environment. So in other words, we allow children to make mistakes and we don't jump all over them. Blonde towards the back. Freedom and responsibility. Now you, sir.
Being observant.
Being observant. Mm-hmm. Children have conflicts and confidence. Children have some conflicts too. Not as many as the adults in your community, probably. Okay. Tessa first. Humility. Thank you for that. Time. We allow them time. A few more. Yes, sir. Internal motivation. We respect their internal motivation. Wait, I got to call on somebody else. Sorry.
No one said it yet, it's too obvious, but independence.
Independence. We allow their independence. Okay, just 2 more. Well, 3 more.
We allow them to move.
We allow them to move. And Svetlana?
Freedom, but within limits.
Freedom, we give them freedom, but within limits. Last one.
Keeping the inner light of the child on. So we support that part of them.
Keeping the inner light of the child on. So if any of you ever had a child in your program who left and went to a conventional or traditional school, and then the parent brought that child back about a month later, what did they say? I saw the light in my child's eyes going out. That's when you know you're doing the right thing. Well, maybe we'll take a couple more. I know there were a few more. Yes? Empathy.
Allowed to ask questions.
We allow them to ask questions. We even allow them to question us a little bit, don't we? By the way, don't tell parents that. But Montessori children think for themselves, and we allow that. Way in the back.
Notice after a while.
Purposefully preparing the environment and ourselves.
We purposefully prepare the environment and ourselves, and then we kind of turn them loose on it, right? Last one. Problem solving. So we allow them to solve problems. Okay. I prepared my own list, and let's look at that and kind of compare. First word I came up with, respect. Adult humility. Belief in the innate potential and goodness of each child. That's pretty important, isn't it? Did you ever feel like that, those of you that grew up in traditional school? Did you ever feel like they had that belief in your innate potential and goodness? I always felt like they thought I was going to misbehave at any moment, and that's why they needed to keep such tight control of me. But then, I'm a hyperactive boy. Respect for the child's self-direction, self-motivation, and choice. Teach by teaching, not correcting. This is one of Montessori's most famous quotes that baffles, baffles some people. But I think it's really key and really critical. Does anyone in this room enjoy being corrected? What frame of mind are you in after you've been corrected? Are you interested in going out and exploring? Taking chances? Trying new things? So Montessori famously and authentically said, we teach by teaching. It's such a simple concept, but it's really profound, isn't it? So instead of, we even take it to the extreme of, my favorite example is instead of telling children what not to do, I like to give them things to do. So the Montessori in Redlands campus, because it's really 11 acres, it's huge, children are sometimes tempted to run. And instead of saying, stop, don't run, what I like to do is just stand in the middle of the sidewalk and look down at the ground. And these are elementary children, right? So they're inquisitive. Pretty soon I've got them gathered around me and they're saying, what are you doing? I'm saying, what is this? The sidewalk? Oh, it's the sidewalk. You also need to appeal to their sense of humor if they're elementary, right? Observe, listen, and prepare to respond. That came up also. Let them do it themselves. Is that the last one?
No, there's a couple more.
Okay. guide rather than dictate. Oh, and yeah, okay. Oh, yes, you'll get every PowerPoint. Yeah, you're going to be inundated. You're going to be inundated. So I'd like you to take you back to your own childhood. I can remember very clearly a moment when my mother said something to me, and in my little mind, I made a solemn vow. When I grow up and have children, I'm never going to say that to them. Okay, it's time for true confessions. What happened when I grew up and had children? I said those things. So I want you to think about how hard a job a Montessori teacher has. Do you agree it's a hard job? This is the hardest part of it. We're asking them to treat the children in their classrooms in a way that's entirely different from the way they were raised. Isn't that the hardest thing to do? So if it's already hard enough, what should the job of the school leader be? The school leader needs to treat everybody in the school community this way. Do you agree with me? I'm still working on it. It takes a lifetime. But that's my basic message to you, is that for a Montessori teacher to remember, to be conscious, to be behaving in that way every day, it's much, much harder if his or her boss is treating him or her in the old traditional way. I see some heads nodding. I want to see every head nod. This is the main thing I have to say to you all weekend. All right, next slide. So if we apply them, then we're talking about humility of the leader, the principal, the head of school. We were not raised on this kind of a paradigm either, were we? When you think of a leader, what do you think of? Somebody who tells you what to do. But instead, I'm positing that a Montessori leader needs to be the most humble person in the whole community. We need to believe in the innate potential and goodness of each teacher and each parent, as well as each child. Did he really say that? Each teacher we can almost wrap our heads around. Each parent, believe in the innate potential and goodness of that parent who is foaming at the mouth and yelling at you. Respect for the teachers' and parents' self-direction, self-motivation, and choice. This is another really hard one. Maybe we might even let them make some mistakes and learn from them. Be there to catch them, but not correct them. So parents and teachers are learners too. In my view of the world, in a Montessori school community, everybody's a learner. Everybody's a learner. Parents join your school and they're amazed by what they see going on, and they're anxious to learn about it. Do they have a long hill to climb to get there? Absolutely. Did you learn to be a Montessori teacher in one parent event? It took you 9 months or a year to start learning what it means to be a Montessori teacher. So we need to cut the parents some slack. Observe, listen, and prepare before responding. This is where your red phone really comes in handy. and where it really comes in handy when a parent has you cornered, this is what you say. Really want to listen to what you have to say. I have a meeting to go to right now. Please see the receptionist and make an appointment. I will meet with you later today. Then go in your office, close the door, and scream. But it's preparing yourself to respond. Let them do it themselves and guide rather than dictate. So I know what you're saying to yourselves. Oh, this is all very great, Peter. This reminds me of ponies prancing around in a meadow. That's not the real world that we live in. It's the real world that we as a community have chosen to live in. And you're probably thinking, anybody else in the community is going to be looking at this kind of leadership and saying, oh man, you're not going to survive a week. Kathy's here to tell you that actually the best current thinking in leadership closely resembles what we've just talked about.
So how we view the nature of the Montessori School gives us our path to leadership. What we're talking about now is, what is the true nature of a Montessori school? What is this organization that we are running? The way that we lead our school, the way that we choose to lead our school as school leaders, says something about how we view its nature. So we can view it from the Newtonian view that led to the Industrial Revolution and created the machine era, which Montessori said, no, for children, don't go there, didn't she? Yes. We can look at leadership that way. That's what has come up through a whole era of leading and managing in organizations. Or we can look at our school as a living human system, as an organism, which it is. And so we're now going to look at some leadership methods that are emerging on the scene in the world. There's many of them, but I've picked out just a few, and we're going to share those just to take a look at how they match the essential attitudes that you have just put forward in your work together, so that we have an understanding of what's emerging in leadership now is actually congruent to Montessori pedagogy. So what we're trying to promote with the children, we are then turning to the adults in the school to promote, because mostly our guidance is the guidance of the adults in the school. That's our work. That's our Montessori guide work, okay? So here's the old traditional school hierarchy, which, the powerful person sits on top and delegates down, and there are assistant powerful people, and then pedagogical or program directors who are in charge of perhaps the primary and perhaps the elementary, and then the teachers and staff are at the bottom. Now, we might have that structure in our school, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we treat the organism this way. So what we're really talking about in history is a way of managing a school which is really called transactional leadership. What we used to think that leadership was about, that it was about the hierarchy. It was about, I'll give you what you want if you do what I want. That's the transaction. It was about requiring constant vigilance, because in order to have command and control, you've got to be on top of everything at all times. If people are late, You could put in a system so when they pass through the door, the time they arrive registers on a computer. Or, you can work in softer ways to help people move to getting there on time. But there's different ways to look at things like this in terms of the vigilance. Correction is used. If you don't obey, then there's discipline involved. And there's an equivalent to the traditional teacher-centered classroom. Ooh, ouch. Am I too close? Okay. The principal is the focus of authority and power and resists input from others. So I don't give feedback to you. I'm not concerned with your growth and development as an adult. You're supposed to know what you're doing here. You're supposed to be able to work with the children. And I don't want to hear from you what you think of me either. That's I don't think anyone in this room is probably exactly like that, but it's important to hear where the history is in terms of managing organizations. So these couple of slides come from Peter, and they're wonderful. The 2 theories of motivation. So one is the transactional leadership, and then the transformational leadership. So we're going to talk about the differences between those two. Transactional leadership is about extrinsic motivation in terms of giving and getting. You give this to me in terms of your behavior, and you will get back, a raise. And so the leader has to rely on command and control. That's the role that we would play. And transformational leadership, which is what we are instilling in the child in this beautiful Montessori environment, has to do with intrinsic motivation. It has to appeal to our higher motives as adults. So there's a whole belief system that we join together on, and value system that we share, and therefore we're all empowered and motivated to do what's best. This is a way of looking at the transformational model. If we think about the work that we're doing in our school as strengthening the human spirit, that's what's going on for the child, but it's also going on for the staff, for the parent community, for ourselves. So all of these pieces fit together, and the image actually was designed so that it had a butterfly in the background. And you know that a butterfly starts as a caterpillar, then it moves into a chrysalis. And as a chrysalis, it dissolves, and there's just a gel in there. The caterpillar framework is gone, and then it transforms itself and comes out as a beautiful insect that can fly, a beautiful insect that can fly. So a butterfly is a perfect metaphor for the work that we're doing, because what we're doing is strengthening the human spirit so that human beings can continue to grow and develop. It's what's called in leadership now deliberately developmental. Deliberately developmental. So we know that we're doing that with the child, but did we know that we are deliberately assisting and guiding in the growth and development of the adults as well? Not only the staff, but the parents. And so our mindset is different. Our mindset is no one is finished. Everyone is developing. And also, so is the organization, so is the institution. Because if it's brand new, it's in an early stage of its life as a school. And so the school has stages too. I hear so many times people will say, oh, it's just horrible right now. I can't get anything done, and there's all these people that need constant answers to things. And I just say, well, you know, you're in the infant stage of the school, and it really requires intense labor. So the institution has stages as well that are developmental. A school in the early years is not mature, and we're working towards its maturity. So this is a beautiful way to look at what happens with mission is that in order to strengthen the human spirit in all these ways, we are looking for fidelity to why we are there. And we don't get distracted by things that would take away our deep purpose. So we keep in fidelity to our Montessori purpose. And then on the right, you see emerging practice. So we're looking to new leadership method in order to support our families and our staff. We're looking at the sciences and research that are telling us things that actually validate our work or inform our work. And we look to the commitment. This is an important one on the left. The commitment that the community makes to itself, the vow it makes to itself as to how we're going to be together. So all of that difficulty with staff getting along with each other can be changed and strengthened by everyone agreeing, by making a commitment to, yes, this is how we're going to be together. We're going to be respectful. We're going to allow for people to continue to grow and sometimes make mistakes. It's all of that understanding that in advance you've agreed that this is how we're going to be together, and that's a community commitment. At my school over the years, we did that with our staff, but then our families learned how to do it with their own family. And they would make their family commitment and put it on their refrigerator with magnets. And that was what they held to. That was what their values were about how they were going to be with each other. So these pieces are a wonderful way to look at that work that we're doing that has to do with transformation. So transformation is about human change. And it's also about changing human social systems. So while we are working on ourselves, in our inner work that every Montessori person makes a commitment to do, we're also looking at, if I change, so will my community change. If I change, so will my staff change. So it's so important that we work from the inside out in that way, because it will affect the whole community. So this is a wonderful quote that Peter gave to me. It is, leadership is not the same as the exercise of power. True leadership only exists if people follow when they have the freedom to not follow. It's a good way to put it. One of the models that we can look at recently in history is what's called servant leadership. And servant leadership, it was founded by a man in the U.S. Named Robert Greenleaf. Servant leadership is about caring for persons, the able and the less able, serving each other. And he called it the rock upon which a good society is built. So here it's not about who's better than another, but rather that we will, in reciprocal way care for each other. So I strengthen you in the areas where I have your back, where you're not so great, and you have the same for me. And we work in a collaborative way together. That is in service, in stewardship to each other. And Robert Greenleaf said, oh my gosh, the best test of a servant leadership is do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous or more independent. So I think that statement speaks to exactly what we're trying to do in our schools, is create communities that are healthier and wiser and freer and more independent as a whole organism, the child, but the parent, but the staff, all together. So here are the characteristics of a servant leader. They are certainly similar to what the work that you just did. Listening. They say that the heart of communication is being a good listener. Empathy. Being able to so care for another that we are one, rather than, oh, I feel sorry for you, that's too bad. Empathy is a deep level of connection with others. Okay. Is that what it is? I'm out of line. Okay. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay. Okay. She said it's not my fault. Okay. Mirka's so wonderful.
You're energetic, but it's not your energy.
Okay. Okay. And a characteristic of a servant leader is one who serves to heal. And sometimes that's very difficult, especially with challenging people. But that is in service to the human spirit. I think one of the most important qualities we need to have as a leader is self-awareness. So that is all about noticing, not only noticing how I am feeling in the context of a situation in real time rather than when I get home at night, but right there, and being able to monitor how I am reacting and behaving in that context. That is a real art and a skill, and it is a lifetime of work, but that self-awareness is critical. Otherwise, what are we? We're reactive rather than responsive and very deeply self-aware. And then a last characteristic of servant leadership is persuasion, which has to do with our ability to influence others in the positive direction. So, we're not going to be successful in our school if we can't influence people towards the direction that is positive and healthy in our school. So that's one of those pieces that we develop in ourselves to get better at. A recent model that is coming out now and named humility as one of the qualities is humble leadership. And so humble leadership, it first began with Good to Great and Robert Collins. I think that's his name, right? Collins. But Edgar Schein at MIT is the father of organizational leadership in the world. After World War II, he began that work. He's now in his 80s, and he just wrote a book called Humble Leadership. And it's excellent. And what he says in this beautiful book is, personal humility is demonstrated through calm determination and presence. Presence. Having that ability to hold ourselves with presence in a way that connects with others, that channels our ambition not towards ourselves. In other words, it's not about our ego. It's not about our own ambition. It is about moving our school community toward the ambitions of our institution. So we're always into the ambition of what we want to achieve for our school. But we deflect, what makes us look good. And so a true understanding of levels of relationship, Edgar Schein writes about, he talks about relationship has one level, which is your role. You're out there in front as arrival is happening and the children are coming into the school, and in one respect you're playing a role. The parent says, oh, I see her, I see him, I feel good because he's there. And that's a role. And it's an important thing. And then in levels of relationship, he takes you to an area called personized relationship, which means you don't get necessarily, inappropriately intimate with someone, but you are able to truly be who you are, authentically the person you are with another in your school. And what he says is that the ability to personalize is part of that humble leadership and leads to such strong relationships within the school that the leader is enormously successful at empowering everybody. So that's what you're looking for. That's what you want. You want everybody to be empowered, not to you have all the power and them not. You want that engine fired up. So that ability to personalize is so important. The capacity to see, and this is very important, this comes from Friedrich Capra. Are any of you familiar with Friedrich Capra? Wonderful physicist, and he's done a lot of work in living human systems. So he describes, he has said, I've thought so much about organizations, and that actually they have two natures. So schools have, in his mind, two natures. So the first nature is it's a business. It's a legal entity, or it couldn't be doing what it does. And so there's certain parts of that business where you are the manager and you have responsibilities that are legal. And that's one of the natures of the school. And then he said it has a second nature. So the second nature he describes as a complex, adaptive, constantly evolving, and living human system. A highly networked ecosystem, all in a state of change. This is why it's so hard. All in the state of change, development, and growth. So he says a school has these two natures. And so the one nature is rather formula, you know the regulations and the laws and you follow them. It's the other nature that is this swirling mass of human beings, all in states of change. And so are their families, and so are their parents and their nannies and everyone. and this changes by the minute, because one person talks to another and then there's an adaptation. And then it will network out and get around to others. And that's really a different kind of way of standing in that system as a leader. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about while we're here this weekend. And then humble leadership has to do with the leader having the capacity to be vulnerable and be open. So that takes courage, the willingness to be courageous. So those go together. If I have courage, I'm willing to risk being vulnerable, being a real person, being authentic, and being open. So that's our work. That's truly what has to do with a transformational and humble leader that is congruent with the work that we're allowing to go on in our Montessori environment. And lastly, there is a new work in leadership out, and I urge you to get the book. That's on the next slide. It's about the teal organization. If you haven't noticed, I'm wearing teal on purpose. And we have teal everywhere. It's part of our logo, etc. So Frederick Laloux is Dutch. He comes from the Netherlands. He's a brilliant man. He is a Montessori parent. We're hoping perhaps next year we can have him come. And he is a thought leader in organizational management. He describes human organizations in developmental stages. And the other thing he does is he takes the human species all the way back to 100,000 years ago, and he describes the stages of our species. And interestingly, the first stage is actually a description of birth to 3. It's the unconscious stage. And then there's a next stage about 100,000 years later, which is a conscious stage. And what he does is he gives each of these stages a color. So you can have a conversation about, that organization is green, or that organization is red, or it's falling back to orange. And this has become a conversation among people all over the world, actually. And so he describes the institutions and organizations of the future as being teal. That's the color he gave the future, the vision for the future. And here's what a teal organization or a teal school would look like at the adult level. It would have self-management. Does this sound like a Montessori classroom? It would have wholeness. And it would have evolutionary purpose. It's identical to what Montessori designed for the child's environment. Identical. So here's just a little review. Jim Collins' Good to Great is part of the humble leadership. Edgar Schein's work as well. And then the book that you should all read and love, you will not get over it, it's so good, is Frederick Laloux's book called Reinventing Organizations. And I don't know whether it's been extensively translated yet, but it's worth having. And the first half of it is the 100,000 year history of our species. That is just fascinating. And then Fridtjof Capra's life work in living systems has given us this concept of the two natures of our schools, which is important to understand because then we're intentionally knowing how to shift gears. So there's many other models of management and leadership, but these are ones that have significance to us, I think, in our work in leading the adults in our school. So Montessori is at the heart of leadership, actually. Current thinking is on how we move away from a mechanistic view and open to a new way of leadership that brings us into congruency with Montessori's essential principles. Away from a transactional workplace and into a new way of being together for the purpose of aiding life that is transformational and in deep and humble service to human growth and development among everyone in a community. So we are here to embrace Montessori's vision, all of us together. Her vision was education points to a new world to conquer, the world of the human spirit. And so next we're going to look at Montessori's essential principles.
What's been really wonderful is working with Kathy and Peter in trying to think of what to bring to you is that what you've just had experiences working together. What are the attitudes that exist for us in Montessori? What are those things, the mindful approach that we have? And what are the characteristics? And Kathy talked to you about what is transformational leadership? What is different about the way we think about the human experience and the experience of the leader within the school setting? And what I'd like to talk about a bit now is exactly what are those basic principles that we have in a Montessori program, in a Montessori community, that make it different and that are specific to the challenge of not only being transformational leaders, but of also making sure that as much as possible we are able to bring to light all of those attitudes that we talked about. So some of those basic principles, I'm going to move this just a bit. Hold on, get this over here. There, I think we've got it now. So certain principles are essential in Montessori. In fact, they are essential to a thriving Montessori community. They're based on the understanding that there are 4 planes of development identified by Maria Montessori, and they also include the recognition that those developmental stages are allowing for the human to evolve to be what they are meant to be. These are essential characteristics in Montessori. Whether it's in school accreditation programs, whether it's in training centers, whether it's articulated in individual programs, these basic principles generally need to be in place if the school organization is moving toward being a thriving Montessori community. What Montessori did 100 and plus years ago was talk about the global citizen. She intended that the work that we are doing was without geographic boundaries, and that she talked about the work we do as being the servant of every child. There's a new definition of a global citizen. In broad usage, the term global citizenship typically defines a person who places their identity with a global community above their identity as a citizen of a particular nation or place. And in fact, that one's identity transcends geography or political borders. And that the planetary human community is interdependent and whole, and humankind is essentially one. We all believe this, don't we? And Maria Montessori believed it. I mean, she lived at a time where she experienced the first plane flying transcontinentally. And she saw what she described as the world shrinking. And she saw in every child that essential element that is humankind. And she didn't differentiate by country or language. And look at us here. Look at the languages, the cultural experience, and that diversity. This is a picture of the Corner of Hope. It's an AMI program in Kenya. This program was designed for refugees from other parts of Africa. And with the help of AMI, We had trainers that went into community there and worked with this community, with the people in community, and trained members of this, which was a refugee community, trained members of that community to create a Montessori environment. This was the beginning. There are many other pictures. I have some others in another part of my presentations this weekend. This is a picture of a Montessori community, which is not a full Montessori school, but the children at my school, Child Peace, go here, the 6th year students, on a trip, and they work in this refugee community called La Carpio. And La Carpio is a community of Nicaraguan refugees. They come across the border into a very safe Costa Rica environment. And we bring materials. The woman that runs this program has Montessori background. She has worked here for 25 years, creating this environment. Has anyone ever heard of La Carpio? Yes, because yes, I would. You would. Probably from Child Peace, yes. The fact is that we have these types of Montessori communities everywhere. I've already heard in the few hours we've been together of programs that you have been working on. Someone who's working on Montessori music, someone who is working with the aged or people with dementia. We are the citizens of Montessori globally. This is another Montessori community. This is in the Torres Straits, which is off the northern coast of Australia, an indigenous community, and somewhat under using the pattern of the Corner of Hope. AMI helped the people in Australia go into community, and everyone in this community lives now with Montessori principles, and this is the school that they've created. So I have just given you 3 examples of what a Montessori community could be. We could make a list that would go way beyond the circumference of this room. In fact, because they're everywhere. And there are now, what I would like to share with you, some basic principles that need to be in place. We could call them pedagogical, if you like, but the idea is that to be a thriving Montessori community, these things do need to be in place. Every Montessori community needs to have a mission. Kathy talked to you about the need for mission. And with the chart that she had, the idea is that it is our guiding principle. That school community needs to have a mission to give it intention and purpose. When issues arise in your school or any Montessori community, the mission is going to put us right. It's going to put us back in alignment. That mission is going to help us ask the questions that we need to ask in order to find a solution to whatever it is that we're facing. Every Montessori community has adults who are prepared to do their work. Adults in a Montessori environment, and that environment is for children and families, need to be trained in Montessori principles. Teachers need to have opportunities to grow professionally, to build their skills. And every member of a Montessori community will have to work and act in alignment with the developmental principles that Montessori teaches us in training. I'd like to have a quick shout out to some of the beautiful photographs that I'll share with you. We have a wonderful staff person who has been at Child Peace for 25 years, who's a photographer. His name is An Vu. He's from Vietnam originally. He actually escaped Vietnam in 1974. With his family, he was the youngest of 9. And he takes these extraordinary photographs, which I think will help also for you to see, just create that image of what happens in community. A Montessori community offers an environment designed with age-appropriate materials, and the environment is prepared with simplicity, beauty, and order. Although that environment might look different in each of your schools, and it might be derived from the cultural experience that is happening in those schools, these essential things need to be there. And they need to be based on those 4 planes of development that Montessori talked about, that environment needs to be prepared appropriately to meet the needs and the interests of children at each age level. They also need to be welcoming environments. Families are an essential component of every Montessori community. The child lives in the family, and a thriving Montessori community will be structured to include and nourish and educate the parents and the extended family. I'm sure those of you that have programs where you might have a nanny be bringing a child to and from school. If the nanny is invited in, and if the nanny is welcomed to learn about what is happening in the school community for the child, think how better that nanny will be prepared to work with the child when they pick them up at the end of the day. So skills and talents that our parents have within the community must be valued. They must be utilized. Our parents need to feel welcome in our communities. So accommodating the needs of the family, dependent on the environment that you're in, is going to create a healthy, living school organism. A thriving Montessori community will also be reflective of the neighborhood in which it's located. The original Casa de Bambini was in the tenements of Rome, completely reflective of the community that was in. I don't know if any of you have ever heard the story about originally how Maria Montessori would check children's fingernails before they came in the day. And that was because she felt that the child needed to be prepared to come into the environment and to respect the environment. But she was also helping the parents learn about health and like personal hygiene. So in that community at that time, it was one of the essential components. She was working with the families as well as the children that walked through the door in the morning. We need to be working with organizations in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and always to be promoting the child development issues, parent support issues, and child advocacy. That is part of our work. Educateurs Sans Frontières is a shining example of the effort within our larger global Montessori community to find a place in communities of all types and conditions where Montessori principles can be applied. That is the work, is to be in community. That work in community comes when your school is more mature or your community is more mature, but it also can become essential to the establishment of your community. So those of you that are here looking at starting schools, for instance, can be thinking about how does that principle become a part of the initial mission of the school. The thriving Montessori community is also a community that is self-reflecting. Montessori had observation as a foundation, a key element to all Montessori programs. To know the child, we must observe the child without prejudice. And the outcome of observation is reflection. If your community will grow and thrive, there has to be the ability to self-reflect. So many of the things that Kathy talked about the self-transformation apply to the organizational transformation. And if the organization does not have the ability or tools in place to do a self-assessment and look at how it's aligning with the mission and look at how the adults are being prepared, to examine whether the parents are being included and whether the parents' skills are being used, will be an important and essential principle that will be a part of a Montessori community if it's going to really thrive. Another essential element is that a Montessori community needs to be sustainable. This is so important in the world that we live in. Many of you have your owners or owner-operators. In the United States, the largest number of mature Montessori schools are nonprofit organizations. That is, a mission has to be in place. You have to have a board of trustees. But you also have to be sustainable because the mission of the school is to hold the mission of that school in perpetuity. That means in the future, moving into the future, perfectly timed for the use of the word teal for organizations because it is about future. And it's going to be very essential for your community to be sustainable, not just for the children that are there now. So with your planning and with your growth development plan, with thinking about hiring teachers, the idea is to be thinking into the future and how you can keep this community alive for those who will use it in the coming years. And this is where our stewardship comes into play, as Kathy talked about. That steward leadership, that servant leadership is here in this essential element. There are key developmental principles that I personally, these are the ones that I like to use when I'm working with new parents, and I say to them, across all the planes of development, you can see these essential developmental principles in place with children. And it really helps parents who are new to Montessori to be thinking about how to really consider what is going to happen and what the transformation will be like for their child in a Montessori program. Some of these you will recognize as being a part of the earlier attitudes that you all came up with. That children enjoy and seek independence, whether it's the child who is just standing up and learning to walk, whether it's the adolescent who no longer needs your parental advice. The children that we work with across all the levels seek, that's such a strong word, they seek independence, they need it. That they're capable of deep and long concentration. If we give a prepared environment, if we put in that prepared environment adults who are prepared to notice the characteristics of children, it's not just about presenting materials. It's about adults who can notice the interest of the child and the skill of the child when they're ready for something, then they are going to be capable of deep and long concentration. That every child has a unique learning pattern. There is no child in any Montessori classroom who is the same as the next person. Observation is the key that we need to have everywhere in our community. The parents need to observe. The assistants need to observe. The administration needs to observe. You know, when I'm working in consultations, one of the biggest problems is the administration says, well, I never have time to observe. You can't become a thriving community if you're not in your community. You have to touch the walls. You have to go in and be where the teachers are. You have to be where the children are. Then you see that those children are unique, and you know then how to respond to them. And another thing that Kathy hit on in terms of organizational development deals with social harmony. An essential element in Montessori is that if you walk into a Montessori classroom where children are working, where they're doing materials that meet their interest, you are going to see social harmony. Because that feeling of children working side by side and also having their individual needs be met is the essential component of Montessori. We don't have to talk about it. In fact, most of us can really help parents understand it by letting them see it, because it's palpable. You can see it. These are just the 4 developmental principles that I find have been very effective in working with parents to help them understand that if we have a thriving Montessori community, these developmental principles are almost always going to be in place. And then, this is what you see. Lower L, 6 to 9-year-olds, working independently but together. And so what is it that goes across all level? It's not only who we are as individuals, it's not only about what our organization is and how we approach being a leader in our organization. We are all doing the same work, and that work is based on this golden thread. It ties us all together. The absolute, unassailable belief that is strong as life itself in the goodness of every child. And with that, we're going to move through our weekend, and I would like to tell you that you're going to hear some overlapping messages. We have worked together for a long time in many different capacities, and the notion of running a Montessori school is something that we all know very deeply, and we know that our goal is to help all of you during these few days get what you need, the one part of this work that you need right now to help you take the next step forward. So just enjoy the crossover when they're there. We're going to be giving many different lectures, but the messages are going to be connected and the same. Thank you.
2 of the most brilliant women I know. But again, I'm the comic relief. So I'm here right now at the podium to talk about our logo, which you see over on the sign over there. Do you see it? Yeah. Lead Montessori, and it has a knot. And I wonder what you think of it when you see it. Does that mean that we expect you to be all tied in knots, like a pretzel, with all the problems you're confronting? And actually, the logo is my fault.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I'm a big admirer of Buckminster Fuller. Anybody ever heard of him? He considered himself a futurist, a city planner, a designer, an inventor. So have you heard of the geodesic dome? That's an invention of his. And one of my favorite lectures that he gave talks about rope and talks about knots. So I'm going to use this power cord from my Mac because they didn't have a rope. And as Montessorians, we use what we have at hand, right? And make do. But I want you to imagine that instead of being a power cord, this is actually a section of rope about this long that's in 3 different sections that are spliced together end to end. One rope is made of nylon. One rope is made of sisal. One part of the rope is made of hemp. And if you tied a knot in that rope, like this, you can actually use your hands to move the rope through the knot. Can't you? So imagine that it was 3 lengths of rope. One of them was red, one of them was yellow, one of them was blue. You'd be able to actually see that we've passed beyond the red part of the rope, moved into the yellow, and moved into the blue. So the knot is not the rope, is it? What is the knot? It's a pattern that has its own integrity. Do you agree?
Yes.
I'm going to read the rest of it because I wrote it and I think I said it better in writing than I could say it by improvising. The knot remains as different colors pass through it because the knot has its own integrity as a pattern, separate from any particular section of rope. In a similar way, Montessori education has an integrity of pattern, which is what we've been talking about all afternoon. Whether the children are in the Czech Republic, Japan, the United States, Singapore, Brazil, Australia, Nigeria, anywhere. Literally anywhere in the world. This is because Maria Montessori discovered that the child is universal and that certain principles can be applied to aid children's development wherever and whenever they are. Our job as a Montessori school leader is to create the conditions to prepare the environment in our schools where this development can happen as fully and naturally as possible so that children can reach their potential as human beings adapted to their time and place with a sense of responsibility to the whole of mankind and the world. That's a trivial task, huh? Don't all run screaming out into the night right now and say, I didn't sign up for that. No matter the country or culture, no matter the color or texture of the rope, the knot has the same integrity of pattern, and because children follow the same patterns of development wherever they are born, when Montessori principles are carefully applied, they will benefit from that same education which Maria Montessori called an aid to life. This weekend, we have Montessori school leaders from all over the world gathered to learn from each other and share with each other so that each may implement that pattern in their own school, in their own country, in an ideal, effective, and sustainable way to the benefit of the children and ultimately to the benefit of us all. So when you look at that knot, what I particularly like is that it's different strands, as we are different strands. So, we're done a little bit early. Should we? Oh, we still don't have a song. I just want to say that today was pretty high level, wasn't it? Tomorrow we get down to the ground level and give you some practical tools to take back with you, okay? So don't despair. We're not going to be doing Philosophy 101 the whole weekend.
We're going to work on the use of music.
To bind us together as a community. And so we are going to take it a little bit at a time, every day practice a part of it. And at the end, before we go home, we are going to sing it all together. And then we are going to sing it in rounds, in 3 parts, in a chorale. How does that sound? It's appropriate to use the piece of music, Domina Nobis Pacem, which means grant us peace, give us peace. It was considered, it's not positive, but it's considered written by Mozart. And Mozart, as you know, worked in Prague, performed many times in Prague. So here we are, we're tying that all together. So once you have the the music, then Inga and Sue are going to come up here. Peter, you want to come up too and sing together. We're going to take it a little bit at a time. How many of you know Dona Nobis Pacem? A few. Okay, great. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Do you see the first line of music? All right, we're going to take it in two parts. First, we're going to practice Dona Nobis Pacem Pacem. We're going to do that several times. All right, and then we're going to do on the first line Dona Nobis Pacem on the right-hand side, the second piece, several times. Then we're going to put the whole line together. And that's as much as we're going to do, okay? All right, so here we begin. Dona nobis pacem pacem. Stop. Again. Dona nobis pacem pacem. One more time. Dona nobis pacem pacem. All right, now let's do the next part on the right-hand side of the top line. Dona nobis pacem. Has 3 beats. Okay, to start again. Dona nobis pacem. Good. All right, now we're going to do the whole line. Are you ready? Okay. Dona nobis pacem pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Beautiful. All right. Should we do it one more time? Okay. Dona nobis pacem pacem. Dona nobis pacem. All right. All right, we'll do the next line tomorrow, and we'll keep adding until we're ready to do the chorale. All right. So keep this. Yes. Yes.
So scientists in Sweden did a study of choral singing, and they found that within about a minute, all the singers' heartbeats
Yes.
are
Yes.
synchronized.
That's right.
So right now,
Yes.
we beat as one heart.
Yes. Yay.